Thank you so much for joining us. I know you also spearhead a lot of the diversity and inclusion efforts at the World Economic Forum, and I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago about what kind of recession we could see and how various countries around the world are actually doing. What can they do more at this point in time? We have a number of furlough programs. We have a number of things trying to take care of the people that have lost their jobs. What are you asking them to do more at this very moment?
I think what we tried to do with this latest study is we essentially interviewed and surveyed 350 chief risk officers from across various sectors. And the idea is start developing a picture of what are the risks, the sort of second order risks that are about to come. So not just the current emergency and not the type of stuff that we all know we have to do 5 to 10 years out, but what's happening in the next 18 months. And I think that's where you're starting to see some of these interdependencies come through. So a number of them are deeply concerned about cybersecurity and cyber risks because of the very rapid adoption of technologies that has just occurred across our economies, across our schooling systems, across our job markets. So that's the type of thing that's emerging. Another aspect is, of course, the risk of long-term unemployment. I think we're starting to see, certainly there's some short-term support, for example, to workers through furloughs, wage sharing schemes. But is this going to be enough? And do we have the types of plans in place for industries that we frankly know are not going to recover anytime soon? So I think that's what these people that we surveyed are starting to point towards.
Saadia, are governments aware of the long-term consequences of this? Have they learned anything from the crisis in 2008? And does that, form their muscle memory on how they need to deal with this current crisis and then the subsequent recovery?
I think the speed of the response has been fairly remarkable, and we're hearing from industry leaders, from academics, from many, that the speed and size of the response has been truly remarkable. I think what we haven't necessarily seen enough of is more targeted responses and more nuanced approaches. Right? It cannot be the everything but the kitchen sink approach. As this emergency continues, as we start thinking about more nuanced approaches to lifting these lockdowns, as we start thinking about how we manage this for a year and a half, instead of just for a few months alone. And that nuance is something that's missing when it comes to the job market. That nuance is something that's missing to how to manage, for example, the return to school. That nuance is missing when we think about where does the new sources of growth come from? Is it a green recovery? Do we focus more on healthcare systems? Where do the sort of industries and jobs of the future come from? All of that is going to require much more planning that we're not seeing at present.
Right. Well, Saadia, what's great about this is the World Economic Forum is going to have its own test tube of everything but the kitchen sink. You're going to have to explain social distancing at the piano bar at Davos, or frankly at the wonderful espresso bar inside the Congress Center. What are we going to do about the tactical realities that the clients of the World Economic Forum face, like getting people up and down elevators?
We're spending a lot of time on the return to work. So we also just built out a massive community of chief human resources officers, right? That's a function that perhaps has been, to our own peril, long been ignored. And we're starting to now see how critical it is to have in place an appropriate method on how to manage remote work, how to manage hybrid work, how do we start bringing people back to physical offices? How do we ensure that they continue to have the equipment they need to continue to work remotely over a longer time period that we know is going to be coming? So we're spending a lot of our time working directly with industry leaders, not just on scanning what may be coming up and not just working on how do you build back better in the long term, but how do you actually today deal with today's concerns, things that are unfolding in the here and now. And of course, there's a lot to be learned between different regions. So we know that a number of businesses that have activities in Asia have already experimented with some of this. And so let's start transferring some of those lessons to Europe and to the United States. So that's what we're spending quite a bit of our time trying to do with the business constituents of the forum.
Are we going to de-office?
I think we're starting to see a pretty heavy trend towards digitization and automation. I think one could say that the fourth industrial revolution has truly arrived. Now, one of the things we point to in the risks report is there a risk of overcorrection? are businesses going to be so concerned about how to manage their workforces that they overcorrect and they try to take too many processes towards the remote side of things, or try to replace too many processes with essentially some form of automation? I think there is that risk, and that's something that a number of chief risk officers are worried about. At the same time, though, it is starting to become very clear that in the short to medium term, there is absolutely a trend towards more remote work, and absolutely a trend towards trying to shed as much as possible the security concerns that come with physical office spaces.
Saadia, because you've done so much work on diversity and how the workplace needs to change, and also gender equality, how will this recession actually impact that? Will we take a step back as priorities within companies, but also countries change?
I think that's a really interesting question. As we build back new types of organizations that need to have essentially greater resilience built into them and more ability to scan risks, it's very clear that diversity helps, because then you have a more diverse point of views that are being taken into account as you think about all of the things that could impact an organization. So certainly diversity improves resilience, but we also know that it improves innovative potential. And so there is a possibility that if we invest in greater diversity, we can actually be ready for pivoting faster the next time there is a crisis.